in the West, people treat the word democracy as a mic drop. Okay, like where are the countries that are actually growing and people are prosperous and people feel like they have opportunities and like all that. And this idea that the West is great and everybody else sucks is totally not true.
Welcome back to Global Power Shifts. Special thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm Jim Stenman. GPS, as you know, is all about this new multipolar world, power moving beyond one single center. And we've been very fortunate to bring on people who build positions in that world rather than just commenting on it from the outside. Today's guest does exactly that. Andrew Henderson is the founder of Nomad Capitalist. For over a decade, he's helped entrepreneurs and investors legally restructure where they live, bank, and pay tax. His motto is go where you're treated best. And he's put money on the ground in dozens of countries. And in 2017, I believe, he did the thing that most people only talk about, and he renounced his citizenship, his US citizenship, that is. So we wanted to get him on to get a sense of how he reads the global map and whether he reads it the way that our audience does. Is it a contest between states for capital and talent? That's very much the reading of a lot of people at this point. And he also he sits on a lot of data, essentially, that's quite indicative and tells us who's winning in this new world that we're finding ourselves in. Andrew, welcome to Global Power Shift. Can you just give us a sense of what it means to go where you're treated best, and how do you sort of use this motto in your daily life? And then we'll get into your backstory as well.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And now building the next chapter with my small little family office and building businesses and investing in companies around the world, and not even just getting the infrastructure with passports and taxes and all that, but actually building stuff in the global South. So go where you're treated best. It applies to every part of my life. My father told me when I was 12 years old, he said, listen, this is back in the mid-90s. He said he'd always come home with the Wall Street Journal and some clip about how it was harder to be an American expat, or more people wanted to move overseas, and he knew people who lived overseas, and he would read. Basically, he saw the writing on the wall that the West and that the United States, where I grew up, was not going to be the dominant force that it once was. He never thought it was going to go to zero with a bullet. Neither do I. But he said it's just going to become gradually less important. He would always talk about things get worse at the margins, and the margins make the difference. And he said our country's going to get worse at the margins. And he said, listen, when you're an adult, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to be successful, this may not be the place. The tide is turning against people like you. The world I grew up in, where that was somewhat celebrated more than it is now, like that's not going to be around anymore. And this country is going to become less and less of a place for people like you. So listen, you don't have to, live where we live. If there's a better place in the U.S., you should go there. But if there's also a better place in the world, you should go there. You should go where you're treated best. And that was a great permission slip. I think a lot of people, what kind of a person would not want to live near their family? I mean, my family always, my grandmother passed away last November, and she said kind of the same thing. She said, listen, you should do what's right for you. Don't worry about me. They really put kind of the concept of self-interest in going where you're treated best above all. Very Protestant thing to do, I guess. And I apply it to everything in my life. It's not just about taxes. It's not just about which passport you have. It's about how you feel in your body almost. When I go to Malaysia, I feel good. I just spent 8 or 9 days. I had a bunch of obligations I ticked off traveling through Europe. I was in Switzerland. I was in Ireland. I was in Portugal. I was in a bunch of places. It feels different. Coming from the global South, it feels different. I was in Rwanda about 6 weeks ago, and after that, Ethiopia. Rwanda is a great place. It is so punches above its weight. And when you go from Rwanda, some of the happiest people in the world, people are optimistic, it's trending in the right direction. You say, this is the kind of place that someone who wants to be ahead of the curve would go where you're treated best, because not only are you going to make money there faster than you're going to make money somewhere else, you just feel good in your soul because everybody's happy. Like, much happier than people like in Cleveland, Ohio, or Mayfair in London, or Dublin, Ireland. And it's just like, so go where you're treated best, lower your taxes, have the best passport, like basically pick the best from the buffet. And that's going to be a different country or a different place for everything. Where's the best place to go and have a relationship where the culture matches yours, right? So stop sitting in a soup where you don't feel at home. I say so many Nomad Capitalist clients and audience members and fans, they come up to me all over the world. Our country's going to pot. Well, you can stay and fix it. Many a generation have come and gone trying to do that and failed. Or you can go where you're treated best, where the thing that you want already exists today. Low taxes, conservative culture, liberal culture, personal freedom, people who smile and are happy, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned growing up in Cleveland. I think you started a broadcasting business at a very young age, sold it by the time that you were 28, and obviously your father instilled this belief in you that you could go anywhere in the world. But how did you take that line of go where you're treated best and actually turn it into what we now know as Nomad Capitalist?
I could give you 100 different answers to that. I mean, I think it's a feeling. When I was in high school in the U.S., I was one of, I didn't realize how rare it was because the people that I talked to, my friends, people I sit next to, they're like, I'm not going to stay in this town. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go to San Francisco. And I was the guy, like, I wanted to move to London. That was when I was 15 or 16. It's like, I'm going to leave the whole country. That seems like the thing to do. I was always fascinated with world travel. And, that's what most people do. They think, hey, okay, here's a better place within the ecosystem that I know. Because that feels safe. The UK is still kind of a known commodity. Now, obviously, that would have been a bad move. The UK is doing worse now than the US, with the exception that a UK passport perhaps is better than a US passport for, people who are globally mobile. The UK would have been worse.
Certainly not in the EU anymore.
Well, you could live in Ireland, but I mean, at least they don't tax you no matter where you live. At least they don't think that you're their property to the same extent. They somewhat do, but not on the tax side. And so I wanted to kind of move within that ecosystem. And then I became an adult. It's kind of like, all right, well, I didn't think this, but it just kind of was the result. Okay, well, let me go out and figure out how to make some money. And maybe that was kind of silly. And, I realized pretty quickly once I started making money, I could do the job I was doing, the work I was doing from anywhere. And so I started traveling. And then I met somebody who really inspired me to travel. And I would just travel and work. And then eventually, okay, now I'm going to move overseas. Okay, now I'm going to renounce citizenship. It's just step by step. I just took it further than most people take it because I sat on the same kind of thing of, okay, let me lick around the edges for a while. And I did that, looking around the edges in terms of like, let me stay in the same ecosystem. For me, if you're going to move, you ought as well move. I'm moving from California to Texas. Okay, you'd probably be happier moving from California to Mexico. You'd have a lot more money. Like, it probably would work out better. Like, seriously. So if you're going to move, just move to the place that actually represents you. Like, don't move to London. People say, oh, where are you going to go? The U.S. is failing. The U.K. is failing. Australia. Yeah, you're going to go to Rwanda. You're going to go to Cambodia, where I just bought some land. You're going to go to Georgia. You're going to go to Malaysia. You're going to go to countries that people make fun of. That's how you go where you're treated best, because once everyone's caught on to it, and it's Singapore, they don't want you anymore. You can't go there. And so, I just think that for me, it was slow going. And then once you really get going, action begets more action.
You decided to renounce your U.S. citizenship. I think it's nearly 10 years ago. And want to be fully transparent, my co-host is American. She's Iranian American, so she's of immigrant background. And it angers her a little bit to think of a fellow or a former fellow American who's decided to get rid of their passport. Why did you decide to do that? And did it anger people that as well, perhaps even within your own family?
I'm actually working on a book. I wrote the book called Nomad Capitalist. I'm working on the second book talking about kind of life after doing that. And, Yeah, a lot of people who are immigrants or the children of immigrants, I found this, when I used to talk to all the clients, and we had a lot of like Taiwanese Americans, and their family fought to get there, and their family wouldn't allow it. And I guess they never got that permission slip that I did. My mother was upset with me when I did it. My father understood. I don't know that he entirely agreed, but he doesn't, he understands it's a new era, and maybe if he were in my position, he'd do the same thing. Um, but I think having that permission slip was helpful. I guess most people don't get it, right? Just like most people
Well,
in my high school didn't want to move to New York or San Francisco. They wanted to stay in Avon Lake, Ohio, and most of them did, I guess. Most people, don't want to actually take it as far as they say they're going to. I'm that kind of pretty literal guy that, like, when people say, like, I'm going to learn Spanish, and like a week goes by, I haven't seen you studying Spanish. Like, what's going on? Oh, I was just saying that. Like, I don't just say things. I generally try and mean it. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are angry, and it's crazy to me because I've had an ambassador, like, not one I knew, but just somebody on a YouTube channel, like, say I'm a bad person because I left. And it's like, wait a
mm,
second, if I don't agree with your politics, the zeitgeist now in the U.S. is, if you don't like it, get out. Okay, I don't like it. Like, genuinely, you don't have to agree with me. Like, that's my genuine belief. I generally don't like the history of the country. I don't like how I feel in the country. I don't like the tax policy of the country. I don't like the might is right policy of how the U.S. goes and bombs countries. I don't think it's fair how the U.S., I'm not saying Russia is the best place ever, but I think they've invaded like 3 countries. Like, the U.S. has invaded like 10 or 15 times that many, and like somehow they still have Zara and McDonald's, and like flights are going there and people haven't cut them out. I don't think that's fair. I understand why it happens. I don't think it's fair. Like, I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want that done in my name. I'd rather go where I'm a citizen of a peaceful country. And so I don't agree with the country. And so, okay, I did what I was told. I left. But now you shouldn't have left. You can't please these people. Basically, if you don't agree with them, they're going to find a way to complain. And now I find, as I've kind of divested myself of U.S. stocks, I'm concerned, not because I'm some communist who hates Trump, but I'm concerned when I look at what Trump is doing on the populist side, that a Berkshire Hathaway or a company like that could be affected by some populist economic measures that Trump or the next guy will propose. I don't want to own that company. I think there's better companies somewhere else. And so I've got a bunch of middle-aged white guys, now criticizing me that I've lost my mind. No, I just don't agree with you, and it hits you in this identity where you've made it to 45 years old, and it's like, holy cow, what if everything I've done my entire life was wrong? I can't have Andrew possibly be onto something. I'm just living my life the way I want to live my life, and somehow, if you want to live in the U.S., God bless you. I think that there's some things that most people don't consider, but if you've considered them, like, that's your choice, and I wish you well. I don't know why, other than kind of tyranny of the majority, we judge people who make choices that we wouldn't make, even though, like, my choice isn't bothering anybody, other than, like, I'm no longer paying millions of dollars of taxes to the U.S. Treasury. Okay, that's what it should be. I don't live there anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, people are going to be angry when you make unconventional decisions.
yeah. I guess the counter argument for some people would be that obviously, the US, there's freedom of speech and a lot
There's
of
not.
civil liberties. Well,
There's not.
so we want to get into that, but that would be the counter argument by some people, right? So how do you respond to that? Because you've grown up in an environment where these values do exist to a certain extent. It might have changed, and that's sort of helped make you the person you are today. So is it just a
Yeah.
case of having outgrown your country in a
I
way,
don't.
or
I mean,
how do you see it?
there was probably some point in history where I would much more identify with it. But then again, you could go back to, I don't think that, like, shooting bison out of a railroad car was a great thing to do either, and we've seen the downstream consequences of that. So I don't know at what point. There were probably different points in U.S. history where I could say, okay, I identify with the country on this part. I don't. I, I've thought about it for much of my 41 years. I kind of just decided, you know what, I feel like I've put more thought into it than 99.9% of humans. I'm kind of done. I made my decision. It's pretty irreversible. I highly doubt they want me even to come back to live, let alone visit, and that's fine. their country. They can do what they want. But I have to live in the now. People say, "Oh, it's a shame." I say it just is. It's what happened. It's what happens when governments get too big and too bloated and corrupt and all those things. It would happen anywhere. I just happen to think that the United States is not inherently so much morally superior to China, where I'm sure some of the same stuff happens. I mean, Marco Rubio said there is no free speech. If you're Julian Assange, there's no free speech. So, once things become conditional, they doesn't really apply anymore. I don't think a lot of people feel there's free speech. I don't think that people who spoke out against Donald Trump and have been prosecuted think there's free speech. I mean, John Bolton, who's fundamentally a horrible human being, is going to go to prison, I guess, for whatever. Why? Because he crossed Donald Trump. I think it's a pretty slippery slope. And I would say the same thing if it's Republican or Democrat. I'm not I'm not a leftist by any means. But I think it's pretty scary. And I think people support it. And I'll tell you why. My father, when he said, "Go where you're treated best," he's like, "Listen, there's going to come a time." He said this maybe 20 years before Trump. There's going to come a time as these things happen. People in this country, they've never seen anything like it. They've been used to living on easy street for decades now. And once you're no longer living on easy street, as they no longer are, now it's tough. Now there's global competition. I hire around the world. I don't hire Americans. So I've got, how many employees that would have been in the U.S. 30 years ago. And now it's tough. And now you see people are suffering. I don't wish for them to suffer. I'm happy that people in Malaysia or Georgia get a chance to have a slice of the pie, though. But my dad said there's going to come a time when people are going to say, "Throw the bums out. We don't care. Elect some clown. We don't care who he is. Just we're so sick of it. Put this guy in charge because we're finally hurting." And that's what Trump is all about. And so because of that, people don't care as much. The U.S. was always the most charitable country in the world, and people cared, and let's go and save the poor Iraqis or this and that. Nobody cares anymore. Why? Because they have to think about themselves first, because their country has descended to the level they can't afford to care about anybody else. And so, in that environment, I think very dangerous things happen, where people normalize people who don't agree with them having their freedoms and having their assets taken away. And we're seeing that right now.
Listen, I can definitely relate to your story. I'm obviously not in the same caliber as your clients, but born and raised in Sweden, lived there for the first 20 years of my life. I'm going to be 43 next month, and I left more than 20 years ago, so I get it. A lot of countries, such as the UK, I mean, they penalize, I guess, the sort of clients that you're working on by demanding a massive exit tax when people with money do decide to leave. Why do you think that is? I mean, are countries now sort of discovering the appeal of your services and the fact that the idea of going where you're treated best is really catching on, and they're losing high income earners? I mean, the UK is probably a significant, strong example of that.
I don't run Nomad Capitalist day to day at this point, so it's service that I own the company. But I mean, I even still, as the face for many years, I got a message just today from a guy on LinkedIn. He said, "Hey, who do I get in touch with? I want to leave the UK." And yeah, I mean, the idea that in this day and age people aren't going to move is silly. And I've watched politicians say, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, said, "Where are you going to go during COVID?" Like, I don't know, 250
potential future president as well.
Countries, yeah. I mean, where are you going to go? Whenever they'd have a millionaire's tax in some state in the U.S., like, people aren't going to move. Look at New York City. Look at California. Now, you're seeing some people go back to California because Idaho, didn't resonate with them. But many aren't. And so, what's changed now versus 30 years ago is there are places to go. I mean, if my dad in 1996 would have been like, "We're moving to Malaysia," you'd be like, really? Now, maybe Singapore would have taken you in, but even Singapore was kind of like doing really well, but not like the guaranteed case study it is today. Today, I mean, I can't walk down the street in Tbilisi. I walked down the street yesterday. Hey, I moved here. I bought a tea company. I did this. I did that. The guy's telling me he's lived here for 6 years. And so Nobody was moving to Georgia in 1996. People were getting out of Georgia. It was a hellscape. But now you've got all these options. And so it's the same multipolarity I'm sure you talk about all the time. What's going to replace the United States? A lot of places. And so 1% go here, 1% go there, 5% go to Dubai, then there's a war, then 2% of them go to Milan. A lot of the British now are going to places like Milan with that tax deal. And even countries like, Italy or Greece, I mean, these were economic basket cases. At least they are smart enough to say, hey, if you're not already paying taxes here, we'd rather have something than nothing. Give us $100,000 a year. Or now Italy, give us $300,000 a year. Make all the money you want. Please bring us your 10 million euro a year company. We'll just take a tiny slice because we're getting nothing from you right now. We got our own problems. The English-speaking countries are too arrogant to do that. And I think that's my fear. They're not going to do it by being open. They're going to do it by clamping down. They're going to do it by taking stuff. They're going to do it through either the front door or the back door. And so as to your exit tax question, I can see some logic in saying you can't live in the United States your entire life or whatever country you want. The UK actually historically has been pretty lax in that regard. But, you can't live in the United States, build up a company, and then just like once you have a great fortune, leave and not pay anything because it's unrealized. I kind of get their point there. So if you think you're going to be financially successful, you ought to leave your country before, it's expensive to do so. Especially if your wealth is illiquid, like you own your company, you may not be able to leave. And I've seen that from people. What is fundamentally more immoral to me is why we're taxing people at such high levels in the first place. When, don't you like police and roads? Dubai is the easiest one, but there's many others. I've seen lots of police. They're driving better cars than your police. The roads are better, cleaner, smoother. There's less crime, like higher standard of living in Dubai than there is in Cleveland, Ohio, or Liverpool, or wherever else that you're from. This idea that you need, well, that's just an oil company. I'm not looking for an explanation of why those countries work. I just need to know as a consumer they do work. And the world has become a competitive marketplace, and we've kind of crossed this, what is it, the fourth round, I don't know, whatever, the fourth wall, whatever you want to call it, where finally people are negotiating their loyalty to their country and saying, my country's not doing anything for me. During COVID, Australia told me I can't come back. And most Australians still will say that's a great thing. Yes, please, you're a citizen, but screw you. You're not one of us. Stay out. You're a citizen. You can't come back to your country. Okay, wait. The whole deal we had where we were helping each other is dead. I'm just helping you. And so now this last, thing of that nobody ever shopped in a marketplace for of where do I live? Where am I a citizen? Where do I pay tax? Has been crossed. I understand why an Iranian would want to get a better passport. It's ironic that, if it weren't for the United States, in part, Iran would be a more prosperous country. Same with Cuba, same with all the countries the U.S. sanctions and holds back. And people want to escape that, and they go to the very places that caused the problems in the first place. But I just fundamentally think it's all heading in the wrong direction. And so, paying an exit tax that, you would have lived there and paid that tax anyway. Why are we taxing people so much when it's just so uncompetitive?
A lot of EU citizenship by investment programs, they're increasingly, shut down or gutted.
Yeah.
You work with people looking to get second passports. Where is the smart money moving right now for people that are looking for a plan B?
Again, I won't speak for the company or the clients. I'll speak for myself. I think there's two schools of thought, right? There's people who have families, and there's people who they like the legacy. Listen, I'm a very deeply romantic person, actually. People think I'm just running a spreadsheet. I'm running how do I feel? I'm running what does it look like? Ralph Lauren, he's like, everything I do is a movie. I look at life like a movie. Where do I want to live? So I understand somebody might say, family, want the romance, Europe, it's comfortable, I'm not screwing around, it's easy enough to adapt to. Whether I agree with it or not, that's their thesis. And they want to go and get the European passport, in part because they can't imagine not having a U.S. passport if they do what I do. If they want that option to renounce as I did, they think, I want an equal quality or better passport. And that's one school of thought. And you're right. There's still an option in Malta. There's still some of the, kind of fast track programs where if you're a serious investor or a serious philanthropist, I mean, we can get you a passport. I mean, I'm going as I make investments around the world and talking to people and saying, hey, if I built this thing in your country, do you think somebody would recommend me for citizenship? And so there are still
How
those
many
deals.
citizenships do you have at this point, Andrew?
I think I
Roughly.
think 6, and I'm applying for 2 more, and I decided not to do another one. I decided not to do Egypt, which I think they're not so happy with me about. But I was so it's 6, maybe 2 more in the pipeline, and always looking at stuff. But here's the second camp, right? The people who they want to go to Europe. Yes, it's becoming tougher. At a certain point, by the way, I say to myself, as someone who's a residence permit holder in 2 different European countries, I say to myself, why is everything so hard here? And at what point do I say, whatever I think I'm getting on the back end isn't worth the front end? It's not worth all the hassle, all the inefficiency, all the bureaucracy, all the extra rules that somehow other countries don't have, and they function just fine. So my thesis, the second caliber of person is, I'm okay to not be able to go to a couple of countries around the world. I need to get a visa to go to the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And I guess now the UK would be harder. I'm fine with that. I have no interest in going to Canada. I'm sure it's a wonderful place, but it's not for me. Like, for why? I mean, the last time I was there, I got barked at. The boy. Why would go where you're treated best? If I can go to Malaysia and I'm welcomed, why would I go to Canada and be barely tolerated at best? And so I just say to myself, I'd rather have a portfolio of passports that are all heading in the right direction. I became a Cambodian citizen last year. Cambodia is part of this 11-country bloc in Southeast Asia called ASEAN. ASEAN probably never has freedom of movement like the European Union, but they probably have greater collaboration over time. I have one African passport. I'm working on another right now. I think you're seeing a lot of countries, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, Pan-Africanism. I was at the Africa CEO Forum. It's the big topic. We need to all band together as African countries to have visa-free travel. You have the 7 countries now you can all travel between. I think it's going to become banking, trade, possibly investment are all going to be easier for Africans in Africa. If there's opportunities there, I'd rather be a citizen of that bloc than be a foreigner at a time when they're increasingly tired of foreigners. When the richest guy in Africa is saying, I'm only investing in Africa. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially once they fully implemented the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, right? Because then
there's a number of things. That's the big one. Yes.
Creation of the biggest single market in the world.
I listen. I have a bank. I have one of these very fancy banks somewhere in the world, and they understand me. Many don't. If I wanted to go and open a Swiss bank account tomorrow, I'm sure many would say, wait, Cambodian, get out of here. I decided I don't want to live for Swiss bankers. I don't want to live for U.S. ambassadors. They don't like me anyway. I'm not old money. I don't like the U.S. Like, they're not going to be my friend no matter what I do. So I might as well live for myself. And I love Cambodia. I feel amazing there. I would genuinely rather go to Cambodia than to the U.K. any day of the week. It's not an insult against the U.K. It's just that's where I feel better. I love the frontier. I love the building. I love seeing the world change. And so my philosophy is I'd rather have a basket of those passports where most of the world is pretty open. The global south doesn't really care where you're from. I have friends from evil Russia and Belarus and places, and you know from Iran. I mean, if you're Russian, you're welcome everywhere in the world except for the U.S. and Europe. They don't listen. Okay, your country's not. We don't agree with your country. We don't agree with the U.S. Whatever. It's not our business. Just come to our country. And I just think that that's the better way to go because it's so much less friction than dealing with Europe. Listen, if people love regulations, then my life's not for them. I kind of think at a certain point, the U.S. and Europe weren't always so regulated, and it worked just fine. And I'd rather, live in that kind of world.
Yeah, we can definitely see how regulation, especially in the tech space, is really hurting the U.S.
Europe.
A lot of businesses, yeah, absolutely. And once those businesses take off, they move to the U.S. I have quite a few more questions I want to get through. So just very quickly on Dubai. Obviously, I'm based in Dubai. I've lived in the UAE for past 10 years. This has been sort of the default answer for a lot of people looking to cut their tax. What's your read on Dubai and the UAE, especially after sort of the regional situation that we're in at the moment?
I mean, I'm planning some stuff kind of end of 2027 in Dubai, like an event. Um, so
Is that
I
Nomad
obviously have
Capitalist
some.
Live
Uh, you'll have to
potentially?
wait and see. But
Yeah.
I think the government there has done an amazing job. My disquiet with the UAE is that, to your point, it's become this kind of default choice where everybody just follows the herd. Listen, I suppose to some extent I don't like to follow the herd. I live in Bogota in Colombia. Why? I go to Medellin. It's kind of got that, it's kind of got that sex tourism energy. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be associated with that. So I live in Bogota, or I live in Kuala Lumpur. It's like I like the place that hasn't been discovered yet. I get to be a little bit to myself. And so I understand other people like to follow the herd, and they say, "Hey, where's the network effect? Where can I go and hang out with everybody?" That's fine. My issue on kind of the spreadsheet side of things is, I think at Nomad, when I was there, our thing was we've helped people move or try to move to like 31 different tax friendly countries. I mean, some are just zero, some are like the Greece where it's all you can eat, low tax. Some are you don't pay tax on your foreign income. I mean, but single digits for most people we would work with, pretty tax friendly. And so the idea that people are just going to go to one is the default. What if that's not the one for you? Because the thing that I've seen is sometimes you get the clients, they do it for a year or two, and then they just like, this isn't for us. Well, if you're living someone else's script, there's a higher chance that it's not going to be for you. And so, I've always felt you ought to do a lot of research. I don't know how many countries you should visit before you choose one. I have not chosen one. I have homes in once I have a house close, I'll be down from 6 to 5. I like to spread my time and see different parts of the world, but you can do that. But you ought to at least see enough countries to decide like which one do I like. And if Dubai is the answer, then fantastic. But people were arguing with me. I mean, Dubai has this corporate tax now. People were literally saying I was a liar for like a year and a half, that like there was a corporate tax, because they couldn't admit, like, their whole identity and business was built around Dubai, 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 Dubai. I'm just a purveyor of the facts. Dubai is no longer a tax-free place to live if you're an entrepreneur, which is the kind of people that I associate with and the kind of people that Nomad Capitalist works with. They're entrepreneurs. And so, people don't keep up with that information. I think Dubai is great. I think it's going to be great. I think that you're already seeing in the Gulf region, they're rolling out some new programs and opportunities at a lower price or at easier terms because of the war. What I think is interesting geopolitically is, I saw something the other day. The UAE kind of feels the U.S. Stiffed them, and how is the map going to be rewritten by these very pragmatic Gulf countries, that have been increasingly open to the U.S. And open to Israel. And I think that'll be the interesting story of kind of where trade flows in the future. But I don't live in Dubai, but I know why a lot of people do. I just wish they'd consider all the options.
Yeah. You've definitely seen that model becoming a lot more expensive, be it through VAT, corporate tax, and I'm experiencing that myself. So it's not what
I
it used to be,
I
but it's still
I
appealing
think that,
to a lot of people.
listen, I get people like to be rooted. I
Hmm.
chase some of the dopamine. I like to be in different places. And I just think there's so many good places. I mean, I'm going to go to Colombia in the fourth quarter. I have a house. I want to be around that for a limited period of time. So I just think people need to be comfortable in different places, to where if one day Dubai no longer serves your needs, maybe you have like the second place you can go. Like, go where you're treated best. I'm not saying move every year, but maybe once a decade or once a generation, you're saying, okay, the thesis has changed.
Speaking of which, you're a big fan of the South Caucasus. I actually spent 5 months in Georgia, came back here in May. I've been traveling to Georgia, Armenia, Georgia in particular, for the past couple of years, and I'm a huge fan of the country. So my goal for this year is to actually set up there and be there part time, like you. What's your sense of the region at the moment? Obviously, in Armenia, there's a burgeoning tech scene.
Yeah.
um, I think a lot of people in the West, when they're looking to the South Caucasus, the only story in town is Russia and Russia's influence. Even to the point whereby I think you said earlier this year that you're no longer paying attention, or as close attention, to politics when it comes to
Hmm.
Georgia itself. You're a huge fan of Georgia, so just talk to me about Georgia and the opportunities that you've experienced there, and what potential you still see for the future, because it's an economy that just keeps growing and growing and growing. But I think the reservation that everyday Georgians have is that it's not really trickling down to
Yeah,
them. So
I think
where do you see
uh,
things
uh,
going?
Azerbaijan, obviously a wealthy, maybe the wealthiest of the three, but perhaps the most isolated, and you don't really see people so much there. I mean, feels very much like Istanbul, where, by the way, Turkey's opening up, low taxes, passport. I mean, great deal. I think Armenia, I mean, super smart, super hardworking people, probably a little bit harder for someone to adapt into everyday life. Better service
Great
culture,
customer
but harder.
service.
Great. Some of the, I mean, really some world-class customer service. They know how to do it, but harder to adapt into everyday life. I mean, even just, again, I look at the markers, harder to get citizenship, harder to, it's just, there's a, you can intuit something from that. Georgia has always been an open country. It's always been the one that people come through, that's kind of the regional hub. You have one of the best banks in the world in terms of performance. I mean, Bank of Georgia has one of the highest return on equity. I've watched them over the last 10 years increase their product. And that's been, I don't know if it's still a good investment, but it has been a great investment for me. Obviously, I had President Saakashvili at our first Nomad Capitalist Live in 2021. I don't agree with him on everything. I think that someone like that might be a little bit too westward leaning, and the U.S. is always right, and we have to just get into bed with the EU. I'll let him speak for himself. Obviously, um,
Well, the
he
Georgian
hasn't
dream certainly doesn't agree with him.
the Georgian. Well, yeah, I mean,
I met
I,
his mother.
I
I mean, he's still behind bars, right?
he is
Not doing
behind
very well
bars.
health wise.
Listen, I talked to some folks the other day. Are people souring on? I don't. I try and stay to the politics. Here's what I know. I know that they've done things to say, hey, we know where our bread's buttered. You can't raise taxes in this country. It's a very favorable regime. People can come and open bank accounts. And, I'm sure there's some things that I wish were done differently. I think Serbia's done a great job in terms of, doing a balancing act between Russia, which they have historical connections to, and China in the East, and also the European Union. But what I see, I spend time in Belgrade also. Why is it everyone has to agree with the European Union? They're talking right now about, Georgian passport holders not being able to visit the Schengen area anymore if they don't get tough on Russia. It's like, why is it your business what everybody else does? Like, are you asking Malaysians to get tough on Russia or Uruguayans to get tough on Russia? It's like, why is it these places in your backyard? Why can't they just do what they want? Why does everybody have to agree with Kaya Kallas? The most dim-witted person anyone has ever met. Or Ursula von der Leyen. Nobody should
You're
be
not a
listening to
big
these
fan
people.
of the EU
Nobody should be
diplomats?
listening to these people. Uh, but somehow we're all supposed to listen to Kaya Kallas. Oh, okay. I let Georgia be what it wants to be. There's kind of the motto here, historically you have to go to Russia, or you have to go to the West, and so people have their different opinions. I don't know the answer. It's not my answer to figure out. I feel like, again, the Serbian Balancing Act has done very well. Um,
Do you still
I
believe in
just look.
Georgia? What opportunities do you see going forward in Georgia
Well,
and Armenia specifically?
Well, first of all, their currencies have done very well. They're still very high yielding currency, just for kind of asset protection and for kind of being
Hmm.
outside of the. And if I'm American or if I'm British and I want something that's different, this is maybe a place that's kind of different. It's not the same nonsense. Um, I think a lot of the opportunities in Georgia. I mean, I'm going to a place where right next door we were looking at property for $800 a meter right off the main square. It's probably $5,000 a meter now. That was over 10 years. I mean, a lot of these opportunities have already come about. I mean, you have to go in when people are laughing. What people aren't laughing so much about Georgia on the geopolitics. I don't know the answer. What I know is all my employees have cars and nice cars, and people are buying stuff and they're going places, and the traffic is a lot worse than it was 10 years ago because people have cars, people have money to spend, and people are buying houses. And yeah, it's becoming unaffordable, as many places in the world are, with food and all that. I just look at where it was 10 years ago and I look at where it is now. I look at some of the underlying institutions, in terms of tax. I look at the visa policy that lets everybody come in and spend a year. That says something about a country when you can come and spend 1 year on a tourist visa that kind of talks about their policies. It kind of says what they're about. Um, and so, I don't know that I would agree fully with either side, but I just look at the progress of the country. Is there more progress to come? It's probably slower. I own land in Georgia. I've been selling some of my more speculative land lately because I figure I've wrung out most of the easy money over the last decade, and the next profit's going to be harder to come by. So that tells you something.
You talked about looking to Africa as well. I heard you mentioning Rwanda. I mean, that's
Yeah.
an interesting one. The leadership model is kind of similar to the Gulf in many ways. You have a strong man in charge, and people largely live together in peace after the genocide. You mentioned Ethiopia
Yes.
as well. I'm half Ethiopian. I've spent a lot of time there. What do you see in Africa beyond sort of the continental free trade area? And presumably, you must be looking to get an African passport if you don't already have
I
one.
mean,
I
I
think
have
you
one.
mentioned having one. You have one.
Yeah, I mean, for 10 years, I've been a Comorian citizen. I'm working in
Hmm.
one, maybe two others. I mean, I was at the Africa CEO Forum. We met President Kagame. In the West, people treat the word democracy as a mic drop. It's just like, you're not allowed to, I've said democracy. There's nothing else you can say. It's like, okay, like where are the countries that are actually growing and people are prosperous and people feel like they have opportunities and like all that? Like, listen, I'm a libertarian when it comes to things like freedom of speech. You would say, okay, Singapore, the Gulf, those kinds of places, they're not full freedom of speech. I also look at it as a pragmatist. I say, I don't want to go to a country and start insulting their monarchy or their like. Why would I move? If I'm moving to your country, why would I go there if I don't agree? Like if I care, like I don't need to go to
Especially as an
Singapore and
outsider.
complain. Right.
Mm.
So I guess the libertarians of Singapore should go where they're treated best. But the country works well enough that very few of them leave. And so I'm not saying I'm anti-democracy, but the idea that, the Western world, like, it takes 20 years to build a bridge, like China builds one a lot faster than that. Like, I'm not saying China's perfect, but like, my thing is let's pick from the buffet of like who's doing what well. And this idea that the West is great and everybody else sucks is totally not true. So I think I was talking to a guy from Shark Tank, Mexico recently. He came to one of our events and he said, yeah, maybe democracy works for the West, but the idea it works for everybody is nonsense. The U.S. has been trying to install democracies around the world for our entire lives and failing miserably. And somehow Rwanda will be a faster growing country with happier people, with better results in the next decade. You can say whatever you want, but the guy running it is sort of what this Shark Tank guy said. He's kind of like the benevolent, not a king, but like he's the benevolent guy just pushing through crap. Is it a full democracy? I guess not. By the way, like, is the U.S. a full? I mean, really? I don't think the U.S. is going
Especially
in the right
at
direction.
this point with lobbying as well, right? It's I
Well, I'm
totally
right.
get
I
what you're
mean, like
saying.
the corruption. I mean, we've all heard a story of Mexico or something. A guy pays the cop $50 to get away. Right. In the U.S., somebody pays Hillary Clinton $50 million to get. Like, it's just the corruption's not available to you.
I think what we fail to understand in the West is the fact that democracy is not the only blueprint for success. And if you look at the Gulf, for example, they have these, long term plans. There's a blueprint for the future in Rwanda as well. And I mean, I think the UK is a great example of democracy. I think it would be polite to say that it's under stress. They can't even keep a prime minister in office for more
They're
than
worse than
2
Peru
years.
almost. I mean, it's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. Where does democracy go from here for you? Because it feels like democracy is not delivering anymore.
I don't. I mean, if you look at, by the way, I saw a study from all the Latin American countries. There's a great service from called Latinometrics that brings all these studies together. And yeah, the view of most people in Latin America on democracy, it's dramatically down in this century in terms of their belief in it. Now, what that means correlated with the fact that you've had all these elections in the last year or two, swing to the right, Colombia and Ecuador and Argentina and all that. I don't know. But I think a lot of Westerners would say the same thing. I mean, the number of Americans who are proud of their country. Now, people can just say this, right? They're not moving the way I did, but I mean, they're not really proud. It's the 250th anniversary of the whole country, and people are less proud than ever. So I don't think people think it exists now. They don't think it. I mean, And people have their own theories. I mean, the U.S. obviously the whole war is bringing out theories. Whether those are right or wrong, I don't know. I think at a certain point you have to look at results, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an employer. I've been a worse employer when I tried to understand everybody's heart and soul. And now I realize, hopefully, trying to be very fair to people and trying not to be some soulless corporate person. But the results matter. That's kind of all that matters. Like we hope, yes, like being a good person is the baseline, but the results matter.
You have
And so if I
salaries
live in
to pay.
Rwanda, yeah, I mean, I just think at a certain point, like that's where the world is coming. Because again, when my dad was born, in 1953, you had very few choices of where you could live that was worth living in. Vastly different today. The game has to change. And so now you're seeing these other countries. I mean, I'll tell you the quote from the Africa CEO Forum, and I think from President Kagame. Africa is rich in everything except leverage. And so what we
Mhm.
talked about for 3 days was what's the missing piece of getting that leverage? You're seeing it in a lot of African countries. We're not going to let you export our timber, our gold, our whatever without processing it here. Now, you can say that's anti-free market. You can also say, I interviewed the head of one of the largest tea companies in the world. They're in Sri Lanka. He said, we always believed in our family. You got to keep more of the value chain here in the country. You got to build the story around the country and not just let London and New York build everything. Because we have great assets. We have great people. And I think you're seeing a fundamental change where these countries are no longer just going to be the wholesale market. Um, and that's going to, and you're going to see these different models of government, come up. And listen, I don't agree with everything that's happening on the African continent, but, they do things the way that works for them. And I think it's trending up.
I think that's the beauty as well in being able to speak with one voice at an AU level, because then that gives you a lot more leverage, be it with the UN, the Security Council, negotiating free trade deals and so on. I want to get a sense of your evolution as an entrepreneur and how you've changed over the years. I mean, as part of doing research and preparing for this, I mean, I did come across some comments on Reddit about Nomad Capitalist. Not all of it is very positive, and I'm sure you must have had challenges along the way as you were working on and refining these products that you
Yeah.
offer. So, talk to me about one big challenge that you faced and how you navigated it and how you perhaps changed as a person, because
I mean,
you were managing a lot of people,
yeah,
correct?
I mean,
And being nice
building a
all the
business is
time
a
doesn't help.
challenge. Yeah, building a business is a challenge. Um, I guess for me, the friction of building, I like the friction of living internationally because it forces you to become more self-aware, and you have to experience different cultures. You have to question yourself. Uh, I had to go through that friction, in the hiring process. If I look back, I say, to what extent did I have more problems than any other business? I mean, I'm a pretty demanding guy. Um, I think for me, the biggest growth was, learning to love yourself, and that's why I make the comments about, you know, what do people say? Oh, they don't like you're leaving the country. Um, I used to I never gave too much stock to that kind of thing, but I would give stock to someone who doesn't like you. And I remember some guy made some nasty comment once, like, "Oh, he charges $50,000 to open a bank account." Well, that's not true. Um, my thing at Nomad Capitalist was always doing the thing. I think still people don't always understand it. Was kind of creating what I wanted to exist, where it's like everything under one roof. And it's kind of the kind of thing where, I ran into a very wealthy client about a year ago. He's like, I didn't realize how important that was until I didn't execute your plan and then tried to call 6 different guys myself. And so the people who haven't gone through it may not understand that. Everybody kind of tries to minimize how hard the work is. I mean, I guess I'll hopefully have 8 passports soon. I have banks all over the world. I have residence permits all over the world, homes all over the world. I'll tell you, I've burned out so many times you couldn't imagine. The idea that doing this stuff is easy. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He's like, I don't know how you open 2 bank accounts. He's like, I want to bite someone's head off opening the second bank account. So I think that, for me, obviously, I've always been extremely driven since I was a kid, mowing lawns. Whenever someone would be critical, I always internalized that a lot. And obviously, I think that's a good thing to do. But I think that for people like that, you have to kind of set a self limiter. So to the idea that someone's going to say people online don't like you, and it's like, what did you learn about yourself? I learned to focus less on those people because you know what happened? Uh, I opened up and I realized, oh, the billionaire who lives wherever, he loves you and he'd love to hire you and come work for him. And it's like, you have to be open to having that. And if you're too busy listening to people on Reddit, Reddit's pretty anti-consultant, anti-guru. I don't, listen, I don't want to be the lady doth protest too much. What I learned, I think that the universal theme across everything is, you can't let everybody else's vote be a referendum on your worth. Anybody who knows me personally knows that my word is my bond. I guess I've had to realize like that's what matters. Some guy. I remember it was my birthday, my 37th birthday. It was in Bogota. A guy comes up the street. I'm like, oh hey, nice to meet you, man. He's like, no, like your company wouldn't take me as a client. Like F you. And I'm like, oh, I just stand there listening to him. And I
Did he not
walk off.
qualify financially?
I don't. I
Who
just sat
knows?
there kind of I kind of patiently listened, and I just kept walking. Okay, man. Thanks. Like I never had boundaries as a kid. I grew up as a Protestant. It's like, don't have boundaries. It's probably your fault. And again, it's a good way to live to assume it's always your fault, but you got to put a limiter in there at some point. And so I think, since that comment, since that guy, I've had to put a lot of work in. And it's finally probably come through to me. It's like, you can't let that guy be a referendum. You can't let the person who like loves living in Paducah, Kentucky be a referendum on you doing what's right for you, And you certainly can't, we made a series called Live Like a King and people misunderstood it. It's like, I'm not hanging out with Miss Universe eating caviar every day, but I wanted to show the best that these countries have to offer. And so, you can't let someone saying you're a snob because one time on camera you ate caviar. Like, you just have to kind of know who you are. And I think probably my upbringing was great in kind of go where you're treated best, and it wasn't great in not giving everyone a vote on who you are. If you're going to live my lifestyle, almost nobody's going to understand you. Almost nobody. Entrepreneur, living overseas, renouncing, it's very illegible. And so if you're not comfortable, and I imagine that's why most people don't do it, because there's a social stigma that I've always underweighted.
Hmm. Does not to go too deep here, but you kind of queued it up. Does part of you sort of mourn the loss of a relationship with the U.S. in a sense? You talked about not going back anymore. I think you reflected on losing your grandmother as well in the past. I mean, it's tough, right? Because that's where your family is, that's where your loved ones are. That's not to say that they can't visit you where you are in the world, but your upbringing has still had an impact on you, and now the connection to that country is not as strong anymore.
I think that people tend to project their own experiences onto everyone else and assume everyone else has the same experiences. We never had that close of a family growing up. I'm the only child. I was the only child for almost 10 years. I have 3 sisters who were adopted. The first one I was almost 10, and then the twins when I was like 14, something like that. And so, we lived like a lot of Americans do. People live all over the country. You're not visiting them all the time. It's not a big deal. I heard my uncle's in the hospital recently. I sent him a gift, and it was kind of like, why are you even doing that? Like, he'll be fine. That's what I grew up with. Whether it's good or bad, like that's what I know. And so I've probably had a lot of friends who are like their only children, and I have all these guys who are like married to Latinas, and like every weekend it's like Tia Guadalupe's birthday party. You're like, oh, that sounds like too much for me. My grandmother was the one that really mattered. But when I first thought about renouncing in 2014, I called her and she's like, listen, if that's what you want to do, you should do it. And we never saw each other again after that, but we talk on the phone, and that worked for us, and it worked for her, and it obviously it's sad. It'd be sad whether I'm with her or whether I'm here, but I made the best decision with the information I had at the time. I think from kind of a strategic point of view in terms of the U.S. going after people like me and having more rules and making tax compliance more difficult. I legally was paying very, very low, if not zero, in taxes. I mean, it wasn't the taxes. It was just, do I want to spend 3 weeks of the year on on pins and needles, hoping I don't put one number wrong, and the IRS wants to put me in jail or so. I don't want that. I just want to be compliant and go on with my life. And I think I made the right decision in that regard. And listen, there's a price if there's one message I'll give to people these days that's on my mind, there's a price to be paid. I think too many people who come to Nomad Capitalist, and maybe it speaks to your earlier question, they don't want to pay any price. Maybe that's why they want the European passport. They want to preserve all options. I'd say preserve the options that matter to you. If going to Canada doesn't matter to you, why do you want to preserve that? For your ego? So maybe I'm in the minority in that regard. You know, I just think, like, you're going to have to give something up. And every once in a while, do I think I made the wrong decision for 5 minutes when I'm annoyed? Yeah. And then I call my friends in the US and they're like, yeah, the cable company here doesn't work either.
And you have to pay them hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month as well. So
Yeah, right. I mean, so
I get it.
I mean, yeah.
Looking ahead, and this will be my final question. Really appreciate your time. What countries and opportunities, investment wise, get you most excited about the future right now?
Well, I'll just tell you what I'm doing. I mean, that's kind of the best barometer. What I think is kind of irrelevant. What I'm doing matters. I mean, I'm buying property in Cambodia. I'm looking to invest, small tickets in companies in Cambodia. Um, we're we're working on a brand based in Paraguay and looking at land and possibly some building projects there. Um, Colombia is interesting to me. It's more developed, but I think there's still possibilities there. I think Turkey could be interesting it's not my top market, but I think there could be interesting ideas there. Those are kind of the ones that I'm really focused on. I still think, some of the best businesses are you start them, you put them in Hong Kong or something like that, and you just run them no matter where you are in the world. But in terms of countries to buy stuff, I mean, those are the real. I mean, Cambodia is kind of number one on my radar right now. Just closed a deal recently. I think Asia is still the best. And then I'm looking at Africa. I've been to a number of countries in Africa now. I think Kenya is next on my list. Next on my list to check out. I was very interested in kind of West Africa and the stock market there. I think it's more, Wild West. I think the friction of getting set up is probably more than I'm willing to deal with. So I think East Africa or Southern Africa is probably a little bit lower friction, but more developed. I mean, there's a lot of places, and it really depends on what you want to do. And in terms of equity markets, I've been buying more Japanese and Mexican equities. I'm not a financial advisor. You shouldn't listen to me, but Japan has done well. It's pulled back, and I think it's an opportunity for me, at least, to buy more. People should do their own research, but on the equity side, that's what I've been doing.
Excellent, Andrew. It's been great having you on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'd like to encourage all of our listeners and viewers as well to follow Global Power Shifts. That's at Global Power Shifts on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you again next time.